Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah shir. We are holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We'll be learning today Mirtz Hashem the rest of limud Beis Amud Aleph, and we'll do at least some of limud Beis Amud Beis. We'll see how far we can get. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Tisha B'Av, and we pick up today on limud Beis Amud Aleph in Siman Tavkuf Nun Daled Sif Yud Daled, where we continue to discuss some of the halachos of rechitza, of washing on Tisha B'Av. Says the Mechaber in Sif Yud Daled, Haba min haderech, if somebody comes from a journey, somebody was traveling and he was walking a great distance, V'raglav kehos, and his feet are tired, his feet feel very heavy and tired, muter lirchaitz b'mayim, it is permissible for him to bathe his feet in water. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Katan Chavav, kehos, his feet are tired. Hainu shahayu ayefim machmas terech haderech. His feet are very worn out from the exertion of having traveled. Mutter, it's permissible for him to soak his feet. Shein za machmas tainug, because he's not doing this for pleasure. He's not doing it to enjoy himself, to feel good. Elul refuah, he's doing it as a means of refuah, lechazkam, to strengthen his feet. So again, here we have a case where somebody is doing rechitza on Tisha B'Av, but he's not doing it for tainug. And not only he's not doing it for tainug, we have a very easy way of establishing why he's doing it. We know that he just came from the exertion of a journey, and we know that he's soaking his feet in order to strengthen himself, in order to sort of heal his feet from the exertion of the journey. So it's not for tainug, and we can establish that it is for something else. It's for refuah. Therefore, that type of rechitza is mutter. Now we go to the words of the Ramah in Sif Yud Daled, a very interesting Ramah. Haga, says the Ramah, Umutter lishrois mapa b'mayim be'erev Tisha B'Av. You're allowed to soak a towel in water on Erev Tisha B'Av, umoitzia min hamayim, and remove it from the water also on Erev Tisha B'Av, and we'll explain why. V'hi misnageves, and now from the time that you remove the towel from the water on Erev Tisha B'Av until Tisha B'Av night or until the next day, umekaneach ba'panav yadav raglov, and he could use that damp towel to go wipe down his hands, his feet. Afilu eine oisa rak l'tainug, even if he's doing this for tainug. Shari, this is mutter, kevan shehi neguva, since the towel that we're talking about is not really wet anymore. It's only moist. Literally, the words mean kevan shehi neguva, since it is dry. Okay, let's take a look at the words of the Mishnah Berurah here. But before we do, just to sum up what the Ramah just told us. The Ramah said you could take a towel on Erev Tisha B'Av, place it in water so that it will soak in water, remove it from the water on Erev Tisha B'Av, so that now it will begin to dry. If on Tisha B'Av it gets dry to the extent where it is not teifeach al manas lahatfiach, I'm giving you a heads up to what the Mishnah Berurah is going to say. Teifeach al manas lahatfiach means something that is wet to the extent where if you touch it to something else, that second item will become wet to the extent that it can go wet a third item. The towel that we're talking about over here has to be something which is not teifeach al manas lahatfiach. It has to be dry to the extent that if you touch it to something else, it will not be able to wet that second item to the extent that the second item could wet a third item. So in our case over here, you take the towel on Erev Tisha B'Av, you put it into water to soak. On Erev Tisha B'Av, you remove it from the water. Now it will begin to dry. If it's dry to the extent that if you now take that towel and you wipe your hands with it, your hands will not become wet to the extent that you could take your hand, touch something else, and and wet that third item, then you're allowed to do this. That's what the Ramah says. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, V'hi misnageves, this towel has already begun to dry, ad she'ein ba teifeach al manas lahatfiach. It is dry to the extent where it can no longer wet something else, so that second item should be able to wet a third item. But if it's not dry to that degree, then you would not be allowed to do this on Tisha B'Av. Now this is a very interesting Ramah, and this Ramah is coming off of the Torah and the Beis Yosef, and the Torah and the Beis Yosef are coming off of a Gemara, I believe it's a Gemara in Yoma, that says a story of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was in the practice of doing this. And the Gemara, the words of the Gemara are a little bit ambiguous, but if you take a look at the Rishonim understand the Gemara the way I just explained it to you. The Rishonim say that you must remove the towel from the water on Erev Tisha B'Av. You can't remove the towel from the water on Tisha B'Av itself. Why not? What's the difference when you remove the towel from the water? As long as the towel is dry to the extent that it's not teifeach hamanas latfiach, why do we care when you removed it from the water? The answer to that is very, very simple, and it's to be found on Lamed Aleph Amud Beis in Siv Zayin. Let's remember what the Mechaber told us when he introduced us to the Isser, to the prohibition of Rechitza on Tisha B'Av. He told us, Rechitza Asura b'Tisha B'Av, you're not allowed to wash on Tisha B'Av. This is Siv Zayin on Lamed Aleph Amud Beis in the Mechaber. Bein b'chamin, bein b'tzainin. You're not allowed to wash, not in hot water, not in cold water. And even to dip your finger into water is forbidden on Tisha B'Av. In that case, if you have a towel soaking in water, how could you remove the towel from the water on Tisha B'Av? In order to remove the towel from the water on Tisha B'Av, you're going to immerse your hand in the water. You're not allowed to do that on Tisha B'Av. That would be a form of rechitza that would be asur. And even if you'll tell me, again, this is the concept that we spoke about at length yesterday, even if you'll tell me, so what, that's not a rechitza shel tainug, I'm not dipping my hand in the water for pleasure, I'm just dipping my hand in the water to take the towel out of the water. Not true. You can't establish that rechitza is being done for a purpose that's permissible. Remember, that's what we keep on saying. In order for rechitza to be mutter on Tisha B'Av, it has to not be a rechitza shel tainug. It has to be a rechitza that you're not doing for pleasure, but we also have to be established that you are doing it for a reason that's permissible. So again, if you're walking through a creek to get to your Rebbe, so fine, we can establish that you're doing it for a mitzvah. You're doing it to go learn Torah. In that case, it's not a rechitza shel tainug, and it's for a dvar mitzvah, so then it's mutter. But for a Rebbe to go to a Talmud, that's asur. Why? It's not a rechitza shel tainug. Yeah, but what permissible reason is that bathing being done for? Same thing over here. You take a towel, you put it into the water on Tisha B'Av, you want to remove the towel from the water on Tisha B'Av, that might not be a rechitza shel tainug, but it's still rechitza, and it's still asur unless you could establish that you're doing it for a permissible reason. And in this case, we can't. What permissible reason are you doing it for? Therefore, you must remove the towel from the water on Erev Tisha B'Av. However, once you remove the towel from the water on Erev Tisha B'Av, if now the towel is allowed to dry to the extent that it's no longer teifeach hamanas latfiach, now you could use it to wipe your face, you could use it to wipe down your hands, you could use it to wipe down your feet, even if you're doing it only l'tainug. Maybe it's a very hot day, maybe it's one of those Tisha B'Avs during the summer when it's 98 degrees and humid, and you have this moist towel which is cool, and you want to cool yourself off by wiping your face down. That's l'tainug ba'alma. But you're allowed to do this because since it's not teifeach hamanas lahatfiach, this does not constitute rechitza. This is not something that could be called rechitza, which would be prohibited. Okay, now we go to Sif Tezvav in the Mechaber. The next one of the inuyim that we're going to discuss is sicha, anointing. Says the Mechaber, sicha, anointing your body, eina asura elo shel tainug, is only prohibited if it's a sicha of tainug. If you're smearing something on yourself for pleasure, that would be asur. Aval, however, mi sheyesh lo chatotin b'roshai, if somebody has some kind of scabs or scratches or some kind of wounds on his head, sach kedarkai, he's allowed to anoint them with something that is soothing, ve'enai choshish, and we need not be concerned that should be asur, because this is not a sicha shel tainug. This is a sicha that you're doing for a different reason. I think something similar to this would be If somebody would get a cut or somebody has a wound of some kind on Tisha B'Av and he wants to put on some bacitration ointment, he wants to put on an antibiotic ointment, he's allowed to do that. If somebody has a very, very irritated mosquito bite, somebody's going crazy for mosquito bites, he wants to put a little Caladryl on it, that would be mutter. You're not doing it l'tainug, you're not doing it for pleasure, you're doing it for refuah. You're doing it because you're pained, you're suffering. If somebody has excessively dry hands, I'm not talking about where your hands are just a little bit dry and it'll make you nice and feel good to put on moisturizer. But sometimes people, especially during the winter, Tisha B'Av is not during the winter, but there are some people who get excessively dry skin and it starts to crack and it's really painful. So then you could put on moisturizer. You're not doing it for tainug. You're doing it for medicinal purposes, for refuah. That would be mutter. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Chav Ches, Sicha. Sicha mikri b'davar shedarko losuch by. When we speak of sicha, we only consider anointing to be a forbidden type of sicha if you're using something that is meant for sicha. Kegoin, for example, b'shemen, oil, oy b'chelev, or different types of fats, or b'bayris, different kinds of soaps and creams, or kahar gavna, or the like. In the Dirshu, Mishnah Berurah, footnote 47, he brings down here v'afl hisafer, for a woman to put on makeup, oil tzavaya es hasvasayim, or to put lipstick on the lips. Kasav anitek avriel shepashet she'aser. The Nitek Avriel brings down that this is forbidden. V'shechein hura hagayin Ramosha Feinstein zechet tzaddik v'kadosh levracha. The Rishiva Zatzal asered it. Now it's interesting. You might hear that psak and you might say to yourself, "Wow, is that such a chiddush? That sounds like regular sicha." I mean, lipstick is something that you smear on the lips, and it's something that's asui, like the Mishnah Berurah says, it's darkoi losach by. That is the derech. So why is it a chiddush to say that that's aser? But there is a chiddush. The chiddush is the reason sicha, at least one of the reasons why sicha is forbidden, is because we know we have the rule in the Gemara, sicha is kishtia. When you anoint something on your body, that is akin to drinking. Usually we say that by something that gets absorbed into the body. So let's say somebody has dry hands and he takes olive oil and he puts olive oil on his hands, which happens to be a very effective cure, you should know. The oil gets absorbed into the skin. That's generally when we say sicha kishtia. Something like lipstick doesn't get absorbed into the lips. So maybe you wouldn't say on that's a forbidden type of sicha. But Rav Moshe paskins that is also forbidden. There's something else that I wanted to say about sicha. Now I'm not remembering. Let me just see quickly. But yeah, the Paiskim also speak about different types of sprays and the like a hairspray, powder, baby powder. They speak of that being problematic sicha on Tisha B'Av as well. If somebody has a shaila, you should ask a Rav. Okay, now we go to Sif Tez Zayin, where we're going to discuss Ne'ilas HaSandal, wearing shoes on Tisha B'Av. Says the Mechaber, Ne'ilas HaSandal, wearing shoes, Dafka Shel Or. The Isser, the prohibition to wear shoes on Tisha B'Av, applies specifically to leather shoes. Avol Shel Beged, Oy Shel Eitz, but if they're made out of some type of fabric, some kind of canvas or the like, Oy Shel Eitz, or a wooden clog, Oy Shel Sham, or if it's made out of something called Sham, which the Ramah says, Pirish Klipe Eitz, it's peelings of wood. I know back in the day in the Soviet Union, they made shoes, I'm talking World War II era, the peasantry would fashion, I forgot what they were called, they would fashion sandals out of the bark of trees, out of thin shavings of wood. Vigemi, or some type of sandal that's fashioned out of reeds, mutter, all of these are permissible to be worn on Tisha B'Av. Vishal eitz mechupa oyer, but if you have a wooden clog that's covered with leather, aser, that would be forbidden. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Katan Lamed. Avol shel beged, oy shel eitz. The only type of shoe that's forbidden is a leather shoe, but if it's made out of fabric or it's made out of wood, that's permissible. Ritzayna Laimar, what the Mechaber wants to say here is, Afal gav de megan al ragloi, even though this seems to be a perfectly usable shoe. After all, it serves the full purpose of the shoe. It protects the foot. V'gam also b'tzuras minol, and it's made in the shape of a shoe. So in every way, this really seems to be an effective shoe. It does the job of a shoe. It's constructed as a shoe. Still in all, the Mechaber tells us, Shari, this is mutter. Why? Deloi nikra minol elo shel or. Because we only call something a minol in halacha, in the context of halacha, something is called a shoe when it's made out of leather. If it's not made out of leather, it's not a shoe. The truth is that this happens to be a great machlokes rishonim in the beginning of Masechtas Yuma. We have rishonim that say this way, rishonim that say that way. But the Mechaber paskins, like those rishonim that tell us that a minol is only something that's made out of leather. Yeah, this is primarily the Rif and the Rosh and the Rambam. I think Rashi argues. I think Rashi says that anything that's made like a shoe is a minol, but we paskin not that way. We paskin that only leather constitutes a minol. Now, if you take a look in the Dirshu in footnote 50, which is located in the back in the Miluim on page 16, in the back in the Miluim, and they write here in the Dirshu footnote, when we have shoes that are not made out of leather, but it's very, very easy and comfortable to walk in them, or regilus, just as if you are wearing a leather shoe. I mean, take a look nowadays. Nowadays, we have shoes, and indeed very, very expensive shoes. Take a look at some of these basketball sneakers, etc., that have no leather on them. There's no leather sole, no leather upper, no leather anything. There might be a drop of leather trim. We'll discuss leather trim a little bit further. But the shoe is not constructed of leather, and yet it's the most comfortable shoe around. So, when it comes to shoes that are not made out of leather, but it's just as easy and just as comfortable to walk in them as with typical leather shoes. Kasav lekaman, we're going to find later on, when we discuss the prohibition of wearing shoes on Yom Kippur, even though the Shulchan Aruch writes that you're allowed to wear shoes that are made out of other materials other than leather, nevertheless, there are achronim that are machmir, and they say that you should not wear shoes that are equally comfortable, even if they're not made out of leather. And even though the Mishnah Berurah concludes over there in Hilchos Yom Kippur that you can't object to those that are bakel, to those that are lenient, and they do wear these types of shoes on Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, it's possible for somebody, it is proper lahachmir bozeh, to be stringent in this regard, v'leilech ba'an peloi shel beged, to wear socks, kenohug. And the truth is, if you look over here in the Sharei Tshuva, I would point you back over here on Lamed Beis Amud Aleph to the Sharei Tshuva in Sif Tezayin here, Ois Katan Yud Aleph. The Sharei Tshuva says, "Va'ayin b'panim mi'irois chelik beis simul chavches sheyesh lahachmir." You should be stringent. Shaloi lotzeis b'Tisha B'Av v'Yom Kippurim, that you should not go out on Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur b'minol ha'asli milavadim, from shoes that were made out of some type of felts, out of some types of fabrics. V'asli kemidas minol shalanu, but they're made exactly the same way as our shoes. Umogain, and they protect the foot. Ve'einer margish klal shehu yachef, and you don't feel at all like you're barefoot. You're mamish wearing a shoe. The lav bichlal inuihu. This is not considered an inui. This is not considered suffering. The hamachmir tavay alav bracha, and somebody who is stringent tavay alav bracha. So here you see that even though the Mechaber paskins very clearly that the Isser of Ne'ilas HaSandal only applies to leather, and we have many Rishonim that say that way, and in Hilchas Yom Kippur also, the Mechaber says that on Yom Kippur you could wear shoes that are made out of any other fabrics. You have the Panim Me'iros, and you have other Achronim who say that there definitely is room to be machmer. Let's continue now in footnote 50, a little bit less than halfway down. Uke'ein zeh hoiru Hagayin Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, v'Hagayin Reb Shmuel Vosner, both of them Zechet Tzadik Levracha, legabe Tisha B'Av, in the context of Hilchas Tisha B'Av, sheyesh lihimana miloleches b'na'olim shenoichais ma'oid, that we should really refrain from wearing shoes that are equally comfortable to leather shoes on Tisha B'Av, kevin shaloi magish klal inoi b'halicha bahen, because let's remember, Ne'ilas HaSandal is known as one of the Chamisha Inuyim. It's known as one of the 5 ways that we pain ourselves as a Zeichel Churban. Wearing, $200 Nike basketball sneakers that are not made out of leather is not Inui. They're very, very comfortable. V'chein das HaGoyin Reb Yosef Shalom Al Yashiv Zatzal. Achosif Shalom Akilim Yeshal Milismaich. However, Rabbi Yashiv does say that to those who are lenient, they have who to rely on. Certainly somebody who this is very difficult for could wear a shoe that's not leather. Me'idach, on the other hand, das, it's the opinion of the Stipler, Reb Chaim Kanievsky's father, Zatzal, you could be makel to wear a sandal made out of reeds, v'shekena minig, and this is the minig. Amnam hu atzmai v'chena chazanish. They personally were machmer, laleches ban pelois belavad, to wear socks. We could see more discussion of this later on in Hilchas Yom Kippur. Certainly, it would seem that it is the contemporary minig to wear anything as long as it's not made out of leather. I've seen many times people bring sneakers and other types of footwear over to Reb Ruben to ask him, can I wear this? Is it leather? Is it not? And he was always matir. So it seems to be the contemporary minig to be makel and to wear any type of shoe as long as it is not leather. Okay, now we go to Sif Cotton, Ois Cotton Laman Aleph in the Mishnah Berurah. V'shel eitz mechupa shel ar aser. The Mechaber said, if you have a shoe that's fabricated out of wood, but it is covered with leather, that the Mechaber said is aser. V'ayin b'shari tshuva. This is the shari tshuva that I just read to you. V'hinei afal pisha aser b'tisha b'av u'b'yom kippurim b'ne'ilas HaSandal. The Chavetz Chaim makes a very interesting point. Even though on Yom Kippur and on Tisha B'av you're not allowed to wear shoes, mikamokim nevertheless hiskimu harbe achronim. Maybe many achronim agree. Sheyuchal levarech birkas sha'asali called sarki. You're still allowed to say the Berchas HaShachar, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam she'asali kol tzarki, who made all of my needs. Why is this an issue? Because the Gemara in Brachas and the Mechaber brings it down earlier in Siman Mem Vav, in Sif Aleph. The Gemara in Brachas says that when do you make, back in the times of the Gemara, they would recite the Berchas HaShachar. They wouldn't come to shul, start davening and say the Berchas HaShachar. They would say the Berchas HaShachar as they got up in the morning and prepared themselves for the day. They would say the Berchas HaShachar when they encountered each item to thank the Rabbeinu Shalom for. When they opened up their eyes, they said Pekach Ivrim. When they got up and they put their feet down on the ground, they said Roi Kaharetz Al Hamoyim. And when they put on their shoes, they said Sha'asali Kol Tsarki. So at least to a certain degree, it seems from the Gemara that the bracha of Sha'asali Kol Tsarki was niskan on shoes. It was decreed as a thanks for shoes. So if you can't wear shoes, how do you make the bracha of Sha'asali Kol Tsarki? So the Chavetz Chaim is telling us here that the many Achronim conclude that you can make the bracha of Sha'asali Kol Tsarki even though you're not wearing proper shoes. One of the reasons for this, the Lavush brings down, and the Lavush is brought down here in the Sharet Tzion, the Lavush brings down that you're allowed to make the bracha of Sha'asali Kol Tsarki because there are conditions under which you are allowed to wear shoes on Tisha B'Av. Let's say we're about to see in Sif Yod Zayin, if you're going on a long extended journey and you have to be able to walk, you could wear proper shoes. If there's a danger of scorpions, you're allowed to wear a proper shoe. So therefore it passes to make the bracha of Sha'asali called Sarki even on Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur, because you have the availability of the shoe should you need it. There are others that say that it could be the reason you're allowed to make the bracha is because we're not necessarily making the bracha for our own personal hana that I have a shoe. I'm making the bracha of Sha'asali called Sarki because the bottom line is that the Rabbeinu Shalom prepared shoes for mankind. So it's on mankind in general, it's on life in general, the world in general, that we're making the bracha, not on your own personal usage that you're using shoes right now. Okay, let's go to Sif Yud Zayin. Bottom line in the Shulchan Aruch. Says the Mechaber, Avel, somebody who's in mourning, Umenuda, or somebody who's in Cherem, who has a very similar din as somebody who's in mourning, Shemahalchim Baderech, who are traveling on the road, they are embarked on a journey, Mutarim b'ne'ilas hasandal, they're allowed to wear shoes. Ukishayagiu le'ir, and when they reach the city of their destination, Yachlaitzu, then they should take their shoes off. V'chein b'Tisha B'Av, and the same halacha applies on Tisha B'Av. If you have a need to walk for an extended period of time, then you're allowed to wear shoes. Why? Says the Mishnah Berurah back on limud beis amud aleph near the bottom. Ois cut limud beis. Kasav Magen Avram hatam. The Magen Avram writes that the reason for this halacha is the Torah gadol hu leilach yachef derech rachaik, because it's a tremendous tercha. It's very difficult to walk an extended distance. To do it barefoot, it's going to cause you a significant amount of pain. You're going to start getting blisters, etc. And therefore, you're allowed to wear shoes. But if you're just going out to the field very close by to the city, also you're not allowed to wear shoes. Many people have the minhag to go to the cemetery, to go to the Beis HaKvaris on Yom Kippur. If you're just going out to the Beis HaKvaris, you're walking a short distance, you don't have to wear shoes. But if you have to walk an extended amount of time, an extended distance, then you're allowed to wear shoes. Ella im ken yesh tit v'refesh, unless you're walking somewhere where there's mud and dirt or rocks, and it's difficult to walk without shoes. So let's say somebody is going to the Beis HaKvaris on Tisha B'Av, and it's very muddy. Maybe it's raining. It's very muddy, or it's very dirt. There's a lot of dirt and gravel, and you can't walk without shoes. Then you're allowed to wear shoes. Or it's also brought down that you're allowed to wear shoes if you have to walk amongst goyim. According to this, if somebody's traveling a distance but he's doing it in a car or in a wagon, or he's riding an animal, there's no heter to wear shoes because you're traveling a great distance. The heter to wear the shoes is because of the difficulty of walking without the shoes, or because you're walking amongst the goyim and they're going to see you and they're going to make fun of you. If you're in one of these situations where it's permissible for you to wear shoes, then the Chavetz Chaim brings down from the HaTorah Sikenim that it would be proper to put some dirt inside your shoe. Okay. Now let's go up to the Shulchan Aruch. Let's go to the words of the Ramah. Haga. V'chein b'makom shedarim bein ha'enam Yehudim, somebody who lives in a non-Jewish neighborhood. Lo yachleitz, he should not take off his shoes. Ki im b'rechav ha'Yehudim, unless he's walking strictly on a Jewish street. But if he lives amongst the goyim and he's walking amongst the goyim, he shouldn't take off his shoes and walk around barefoot. He should wear shoes. And the Ramah says, V'chein na'agu, and indeed that's our minhag. Now let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah here. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Katan Lamed Daled, if you live amongst the non-Jews, la yachleitz, you should not take off your shoes. A very interesting reason, says the Mishnah Berurah, Misham ha'akum, misham ha'ligam aleinu, because of the non-Jews who laugh at us. That sounds very interesting. Let's go weiter in the Mishnah Berurah, where the Mishnah Berurah will have more to say about this. He should only take off his shoes when he's on the Jewish street. Kasav Magen Avram, the Magen Avram writes, nearly it appears to me, if there are a lot of non-Jews that are walking even on the Jewish street, mutter, then you're allowed to wear shoes even on the Jewish street. However, the Eliyah Rabbah, he leans towards being machmir on the Jewish street, even if there are a lot of non-Jews. Because he says, okay, we have a minig that when you're amongst the non-Jews, you wear shoes. But when you're on the Jewish street, you do not wear shoes. Now you want to extend it, and you want to say that even on the Jewish street, if there are a lot of non-Jews, you shouldn't wear shoes. The Eliyah Rabbah says we can't just make that extension. Says the Chavetz Chaim, many people, he says, in his day were very makel, very lenient on this halacha not to wear leather shoes on Tisha B'Av the entire day of Tisha B'Av, even when they're just sitting in their houses. And this is a terrible avera. Even if we're makel, when we're walking amongst the non-Jews, still and all, immediately upon arrival back at your house, you have to take your shoes off. Where he said that a lot of people crept in a kula on Tisha B'Av. People saw that the people who are going to work amongst the non-Jews, they wear shoes. So suddenly from that became kulas on all of the other chamisha inuyim of Tisha B'Av as well. And he says that is a great problem. Now, the Ramah said, indeed, it is our minig to be makel amongst the non-goyim, to wear shoes. However, the Chayyodam writes, those who are traveling and walking amongst the non-Jews, the Naihagin Lilbaish Haminolim, and they have the minig to wear shoes, even though we shouldn't object to what they're doing, since there are great people who are indeed matir this, the Chayyodam writes, essentially there's no reason for this kula. Who cares that the non-Jews are laughing at us? They laugh at us anyway. So they laugh that you're wearing a kippah. So what's the difference if they laugh at you because you're wearing shoes? And certainly, somebody who's sitting in a store, certainly it's also for him to wear shoes. Over there, the goyim that are coming into the store don't even know that you're wearing shoes. So the Chayyodam takes a much more strict approach to this. Okay, we're going to stop over here for now, so we'll pick up Mirz Hashem tomorrow with Sif Yud Ches. We don't have that much more Mishnah Berurah on this page. I think we'll catch back up to the schedule in short order. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schus of limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rabban Shalom should send Yeshuas, Refuas, and Parnasa to all those in need, and we should be zeichet to see the Bias Gael Tzedek, B'Meher V'Yameinu. Amen. Be well.